all of these.
Yeah, sorry, we are recording this meeting, so if you don't want to, don't speak if you don't want to be recorded in that case. Sorry,
that was an important one. Thank you, Olivier. So now we're recording, and as you will see, I was talking of these three main program areas, but the foundation of it all is on life cycle knowledge. So certainly this is probably where the life cycle initiative started, and we'll see that later with Olivier. But the idea of having an important foundation of science-based knowledge, meaning access and availability of life cycle assessment data, but also life cycle impact assessment indicators and methods, that's absolutely essential in order to support the decisions that we've been talking about. So this is the focus of today, and this is the focus of the project that we will be seeing.
Do you see my screen? Or?
No, we see again all the nice happy faces of people still following, which is good. Now we see the screen, but it's not in presentation mode yet.
Yes, okay. But you see the screen, okay.
That's the screen is now there. So in any case, I think we could move now to the next slide, because as mentioned, the focus of today really is on this project to achieve the global guidance on life cycle impact assessment. And the goals, as you see here on the screen, are essentially to support the decision making, to support with a global consensus life cycle impact assessment method and indicators. The uses are plenty, as many uses as LCA, but certainly here we've listed some of those uses that are already using some of the results of the initiative. So in environmental product and organization footprint schemes, in corporate reporting, certainly to support environmental policies at the national or international level, and well, LCA work in general commissioned by public sector or private sector in general. I wouldn't want to dwell too much on this, so I think it's time also to give the floor back to Olivier, who will guide us through the next section of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Laurence. So that's interesting. In fact, the Life Cycle Initiative started with LCIA. We went in 1999 with Ilya Sudo-de-Hes from CML in the Netherlands. In fact, we had worked twice 4 years with CTEC, and we thought we needed an endorsement body. We needed to broaden the effort, motivate people to go, and that's where we wrote to UNEP, to Jacqueline Al-Razid Al-Adarel, who is up here. And in 2 weeks, we were in Paris and decided that UNEP will act as an authoritative body to endorse life cycle impact assessment. So we hope to arrive that eventually to a method in 3 years. So it will be like 24 years later, but it's nice. And that was nice because I think it started really because at that time, Kofi Annan, as a UN General Secretary, had just said he wanted supply chain for that. So we are right in this, and the life cycle issues went broader than LCIA, but it started with that. So milestone in LCA guidance, just to give you a small history, 1992, 1993, the first CTAC LCIA working group start working. They arrived to recommendation. Many of these recommendations were taken in the ISO LCIA recommendation, which were really framing and process more recommendation. We contact UNEP, we launched the Life Cycle Initiative in collaboration with UN Environment. Then we had the first program within the Life Cycle Initiative, which arrived to a first midpoint damage framework. Huge stocks came in this phase. VULCA started, I think, the 2009 there on the water use LCA. And then we moved, and that's where I want to thank again. Rolf, are you online? Are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah. So in collaboration with Rolf Frischnes, and thank you so much, Rolf, for these 8 years collaboration, we started really going to more formal recommendation, stimulating, and that's not just consensus in the sense of agreeing to the least common denominator, but trying also to stimulate innovation while checking about the robustness of the science. And we had these two efforts. The first one, which led the first Pelston workshop, which is a science-based consensus workshop in 2016, and the second in 2018, both in Valencia. And you have available, you can go at this link and download this report, which are there. At the end of the last workshop, we really saw the need for dissemination and stewardship, and we already started this effort here for this report. At the same time, it's crucial that they are integrated into a global LCA to be really used. And that's where, for this phase, we are now working on the creation of a global life cycle impact assessment method, which would be recommended by the Life Cycle Initiative. And we want to establish a comprehensive, consistent, and global environmental LCIA method, and covering the different steps: classification, characterization, going midpoint to damage, and having possibly normalization and weighting to assess the life cycle impact of product on human health, ecosystem, and natural resources. The motivation, we see that global supply chain, multinational company, ask for consensual set of indicators, that you don't have to use different method in different parts of the world. We can see that the recommendation of the first two phases here of our effort, recommendation effort, are used. They are used in the PEF, they are used in other LCA methods, be it LC Impact, Impact World Plus, USTOX is also used in Tracy, the US EPA methods. So that's very useful. At the same time, as I was saying, we need to integrate that into a multinational LCA method so that implementation is really carried out, because otherwise we are it's difficult for, especially for software provider and people to use it within the software. So how does this method would like? Here we build on the framework which has been recommended on 1 and 2. And you have in green, it's impossible to develop a full LCA method in 3 years without having building on the effort. So we see that effort has been, all the category here in green have some recommendation from the phase 1 and 2. So for this category, we will look at the science. Has there been substantial improvement? Perhaps in some of these recommendations are now 4 years old. So to incorporate the latest robust things, but we will put most of the focus on the gaps for this impact category. And for the one in red, we need to develop, in fact, the science there. And for example, for climate change, we have recommendation at midpoint, the GWP and the GTP 100s for long-term climate change. We need to bring them at damage level for human and ecosystem impact in that case. And we'll have a subgroup working on that in that case. We have new categories which are discussed in policy, like litter, and we'll work on that.
Olivier,
yep.
This is still, sorry for interrupting you. Would it be possible to increase the size of your presentation?
I think I'm at a full screen, so
yeah. So maybe.
I mean, this is okay when.
Yeah. In some presentations, there was just one row of participants onto the right, and at least on my screen, I have half all the faces and half your presentation. And I think it's something that you could do.
You can change that on your screen.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
I think that's on your end. Still. Thank you. So thanks for it. It's good to have that. Okay. So the focus will be human health, ecosystem quality, natural, biotic, and abiotic resources, including, we will discuss it, the ecosystem services here. Single score, one comment on a single score. The The goal is not to arrive to one number. The goal is to make things comparable. And I say LCIA is the art of making things comparable in a consistent way, consistently comparable. And so we can always keep the information. We don't want to aggregate. And here, if we go to damage level, and this is not a weighting, this is a science-based damage level, we want to be able to still keep the information. What are the contributions? What is important? And go back there. Okay. Organization of the work for these 3 coming years. 4 task forces. We have presently 107 members registered. Work with monthly teleconference and then subtask, because we cannot work 30 people together on a definite point. And you will see them for the 4 task force in a minute for human health, ecosystem quality, natural, abiotic, and biotic resources and ecosystem services, and cross-cutting task force, which will address also normalization and weighting. We have co-chairs from each of these, 2 co-chairs from each of these task force. I'm chairing the whole effort with Francesca and Peter Fenke. And then Johan Smiley-Canal is also attending this teleconference to coordinate and I would say push things together towards a consistent method, which is a good challenge to have for 3 years, but we need to move fast. We are thinking of creating an advisory group to provide stakeholder advice and inputs that will be established within the scoping process. And we overall, in terms of budget, in terms of nomination, we are under the supervision of the Lifecycle Initiative Steering Committee, which is steering the Lifecycle Initiative. We are now in the scoping process. We've started, in fact, end of last year with a workshop in Potsdam, and we will end it at the end of this summer. We want to frame impact category, looking at impact pathway diagram for each of the impact I showed in the previous slide. And one criteria important is that we can bring them in a comparable way in a common damage metric like DALYs, disability adjusted life years for human health in impact in that case. So the different task force have the mission and the different subtasks working on given impact category to start from recommendation when available. We cannot restart from scratch, I was saying. We need to build on what has been done. Review available method also, which could also come from different horizons, and identify the best possible starting point. Identify the gap, and those we can address within 2 years. We need to be realistic. Identify pathway that can be covered with sufficient reliability. We might leave out temporarily certain pathway that we cannot really model well, and apply evaluation criteria, science-based criteria, I'll show you in a minute. And then propose for, I would say, end of August, a plan, an implementation plan, how to move in the next 2 years, perhaps identify topic where some funding and sponsor are needed in that case. Classic, we've been working the last 8 years with that. We have guiding principle, evaluation criteria for both within impact category and for selecting the category itself. So environmental relevance, that it's important and it reflects environmental mechanism. We are adding here some policy relevance, like litter is a good, marine litter is a good example where we don't know how important it is, but it's certainly policy relevant. So, I mean, even if we would arrive to show it's not super important, it might be important because it's a problem of concern. We want the ability to integrate this category within the framework and arrive to damage, of course, scientific robustness and validity, but also parsimony. And that has been a leading, for example, a criteria for use stocks and the effort that we want to be as complex as necessary to be reliable, but also as simple as possible. And for example, we might in certain category like water use go spatially differentiated, but we want also the possibility that people with relatively simple LCA get default factor or method or archetype which enable them to apply them in a practical way. Potential for consensus, the applicability and experience, which is there, that is tested on minimum at least number of diverse LCA. That's what, for example, for VULCA, for the recommendation on water use, we arrived with a new method. We tested it on, I don't remember, between 5 and 10 case study to arrive to that. And stakeholder accepted it meets the need of the different non-governmental organization, industry, government here. Decision making, we are decision mechanism. We are working on the basis of the Pellstone workshop here, where we have science-based consensus. So it's not a question just of voting, it's really of arguing based on science and applying the criteria I just showed. If possible, we have full consensus. If not, we have consensus on a single best practice. In that case, when we see two or more best practice approach, as we are within one method, we will need to set a default and have some alternative for sensitivity study. And we can always have a well-grounded minority statement in case here. And we are within the constraint of a consistent and operational LCA method for this third phase in that case. Like the previous phase, we can recommend, there might be some category strongly recommended, interim recommended. We will have to decide if we include them in the default in that case, and probably suggested or advisable will not be operationalized at the final level. We had the first workshop in Potsdam last August, where we started looking at the different category, making a first analysis based on this criteria here. And that's where we arrive. I mean, we will have four task forces which are here. And we looked at different additional impact category that may be included that are here and will be discussed in a few minutes. In parallel with that, we have started to say we should not also build from scratch from just what the Life Cycle Initiative have done, but there are global LCI methods which exist, and we want to build on them and learn from them. And so this was a slide from Nohori Tsubo from when we started, in fact, the effort in 2012. That has been now complemented here. And we started a comparison on both the RISE case study, which was used in the previous phase, and also on the global normalization inventory of these methods. And we will continue to that as an input to the scoping phase in that case. So timeline, we are now in the method comparison and scoping phase. That should end in end of August or beginning of September. We work here now at this stage with, of course, online workshop and stakeholder meeting. We were meant to be in Dublin today. We won't, but on the other hand, we would have never have 300 people or 174 people for the stakeholder meeting. So it's interesting, the opportunity offered at the same time. Well, the plan is to work 2 years and arrive in the spring of 2022, latest in the summer, with category specific workshop, which can take along these 2 years, and arrive with white paper recommendation per impact category, and I would say preliminary or test factors that can be down there. This leads us in the fall 2022 to a draft consistent method, and leave us, in fact, a year to early 2023 for a final implementation and have a complete LCI method. I would say early, perhaps recommendation early with a final consensus workshop, and the method available at mid 2023. That's the menu. We need to be efficient. We need to work efficiently in the task force, even if we are a relatively large number, and share and repartition. So on that, perhaps let's have a 5-minute question at this stage, that you are not bored. I would recommend, please have short comment or question. We will not necessarily answer everything now, or if it's comment, we just move to the next. As we are 174, please be concise to keep my efficiency criteria I was just mentioning. So please, the floor is to you. Question, clarification, question, comment, insights, everything is welcome. Don't forget to unmute yourself when you want to speak.
Hello, Olivier.
Yes, and please state your name and affiliation.
Yes, Laji Tikana from Copper Alliance, the National Copper Association. So you mentioned that from a level, midpoint to the next level or next levels, it is not about waiting. So can you be more specific on that?
If you like, if you like, weighting is defined by ISO as a value-based weighting. Most of the effort which is here, I mean, like climate change, you have a model which have a certain level of uncertainty, but which will look, for example, at damage, increase of damage due to malaria, increase in malaria in the world. So in a sense, this is not different in term conceptually than arriving to DALYs from human toxicity if you have here DALYs for malaria. So it's still, if you like, a natural science-based modeling with relatively high uncertainty here. Now, when I mean, combining them at the human health can be mostly science-based. There are a few still value-based, like if you would be years of life lost, this is if you like, there is no social weighting. There is a weighting in the DALYs because you have disability weight, which are accepted worldwide there. But most of the effort here is based on natural science. When you arrive here and how much weight you give to human health and ecosystem, this is value based, and it's a bit different. We might speak more about that in case. Other question.
Okay, thank you.
Olivier, maybe I see there's also some questions in the chat.
Okay, yes, but could you read them?
Yeah, so I see, well, actually, there's one from Yolanda Lechon saying, to what extent you will seek harmonization with the product environmental footprint from the EC?
I would say like that, we are in coordination with the project environmental footprint. In fact, already in the previous phase, like on ecotox and things like that, we have been coordinating. As far as possible, yes, we will seek coordination. I don't know if Serenella is on the call here, but we will look for that as far as we can. But at the same time, we will be really, in terms of choices of data, take really global data as far as we can. But the PEF is also aiming at that in many respects. So we want to avoid, as far as possible, that's correct, to have several recommendation, and where we can, we will strive for harmonization. And so far, we have been successful, I think, to that.
Yes, I'm here, Olivier. Hello to everybody. Just maybe a small comment on that. Of course, the environmental footprint of the Commission is a separate initiatives, but we were involved in the past, and we are still interested in being involved in different activities of the task force, because of course converging on methods used widely, it's I think the ambition for all. But I think it's important to understand that it's not so automatic that what is done in the PEF is then translated in this initiative or the other way around. There are anyway different processes behind.
Yep. Thank you, Serena.
This is Arthur Braunschweig speaking. Hi, Olivier. Hi, Lauren. Thank you very much for this highly interesting initiative. Thank you all also. You have presented your work plan. You have presented your current status as a structure. Now I wonder what kind of comments you would expect from at this point in time. Of course, it does not make sense now to discuss methodological details. So I wonder if you could express what your expectations of this meeting are.
There are two goals. One is that you know what's going on and the direction which are taken. On the other hand, we are in a scoping phase. So if you say you will see, we'll go a bit more in detail in the impact category. If you say you are missing this impact category, there are special things to be considered. You can tell it now, or you can tell it in a written way. But it's important that everybody is informed of what is foreseen, and it's an open process. So we are flexible. When we did the scoping phase in 2012, I would say, as a steering or organizing committee, we had foreseen certain impact category. I can tell you at the end of the process, we chose different impact category because of the input we had. So it's very useful to get your insight and what you see as important. I mean, policy relevance we don't have this overview. Okay.
Thank you. May I add then a question?
Yes, go ahead.
On the graph which you have shown, which actually is very small, but it contains a lot, as with recipe and so on. What in the legend to the formatted arrows, I missed the legend to red dashed line, because the combination
okay,
of damages to single score is a red dashed line, and I do not see the explanation. Is it part of the project or is it not?
It's part of the project, but it's missing presently. Okay, if it's red means it doesn't. We haven't worked on that. I mean, it might exist in other methods, which is here. I'm not sure. Yeah, this is the it means it's weights here. The dash means weights, and a priori we will focus on the area of protection that we've been traditionally working on. Okay.
Does it mean the project does not aim to create a single score?
The project aims to have weighting factors. Okay. I say
then I don't understand your answer, because dashed means it's not part, but then you said it's part of the project, so I don't understand it.
It's part the way it means it's a weighting step, which is dashed. Okay. It's here. It's not that it's so it's part of the project. We have a group on normalization and weighting, to be clear. And there I would say it's interesting that the Lime 3 method that I was here has done a wonderful job there to ask about, for example, weighting factor in the entire world from different country, and we see there are different point of view between developing and developed country. For example, the importance to ecosystem is higher, in fact, in developed country, which is interesting. Okay. Other question? Then perhaps I think
Olivier, there's 2 or 3 more questions in the chat. I'm not sure if we have time, but Alexandre Gauthier, well, actually, first ask one about reducing the environmental impact of the life cycle initiative, which I'm not sure, but maybe that's something I can talk about if that's, but maybe in a different time. And he also asks about the planetary boundaries methodology, whether it's in scope or is that too early. And there's another question from Laure Patouillard on how will work. So how will the operationalization phase work, and whether it's the same process as for the recommendations?
So the planetary boundary, that will be typically part of the normalization and weighting task, I would say. There are certainly, I mean, that's interesting to consider that. But if you have that on your heart, come and join the effort and bring it, and we'll see how it can be incorporated in the framework. That will be interesting. The second question on implementation, as it's the last step, we have not decided, and Laure has been wonderful for implementing Impact World Plus, so her experience will be important on that. We are thinking of doing more than in the first phase. I would say not just arrive with factor, but we would have an implemented method. Ideally, but that would require the funding specific for that. That would be really to provide also a web system which enable people to calculate their own factors or in a reliable way or things like that. But this remains to be seen. But we are working, if you like, we are working that. Perhaps Peter can say 2 words afterwards when you present on human health. Okay, I think perhaps we'll move to the different task forces. So the conference, just to say, we have foreseen 1 hour, 15 minutes as a whole. And so we'll take each task force about 5 minutes and also have a small feedback on each task force if you see impact category as a feedback that you can tell us. So Peter, you're on for the Human Health Task Force.
Thank you, Olivier. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, whatever for everyone on the call from around the world. I have 5 minutes, but perhaps 6 slides, so I will speed talk as usual. Please, the next slide, Olivier. The Human Health Task Force, I'm happy to share that together with Tom McCone, and we have already several people who are really interested and engaged. We start from the recommended categories from the initial 2 phases of the GLAM project. So we have already recommendations how to model things for climate change impacts on human health, for fine particulate matter related impacts on human health, for human toxicity impacts, and for water use impacts on human health. So that's our starting point, and now it's really the way how to make that harmonic, bring it to the endpoint consistently, and seek to introduce additional impact categories that are missing, but also contributing to human health. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what we want to harmonize is really for climate change specifically, it's about the damage modeling, how to translate the midpoint into the endpoint indicators. So going to DALI. For the fine particulate matter, I will have a scoping slide later on that. We focus mainly on the indoor modeling and on the secondary PM formation here. And for human toxicity, we seek to include now consistently the consumer and worker related exposures around the near field, which is the vicinity around the consumers and the workers, as compared to the far field outdoor environment, which is currently already included in use tox and other LCIA methods for human toxicity. Additional impact categories, which are in focus now during the next years in this 3rd phase of the GLAM project, are nutritional and water use related impacts, noise related impacts, all on human health, of course, ionizing and non-ionizing radiation impacts, including here the relevance for ozone depletion, accident related impacts, physical and other injuries related impacts. And then, of course, if you have a couple minutes later after my presentation here, I would be happy if you can think of something important that is still missing in our scope here. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we have, I have put on the screen 2 more detailed scoping documents. So for each of the impact categories that we are having in focus in this phase, we in fact are preparing currently a document where we scope the work to be done, what the starting points are, where we already have recommendations available and consensus from which we can start instead of reinventing the wheel here, and where indeed we need to even come to these initial methodological recommendations first. For PM 2.5 related impacts, we have already consensus from the first 2 phases of the GLAM project. We have published papers, we have discussed them and implemented them for the overarching framework, going from an emission to an endpoint for PM really, and the main focus was primary, so directly emitted particles indoors and outdoors. We have arrived at consensus for intake fractions, which covers the exposure side, and also for the effect side through nonlinear exposure response functions. What remains to be done in the next 2 years is to look more into integrating consistently indoor and outdoor emissions and exposure environments, looking for indoor specifically around the formation of secondary organic aerosols, which are particles formed from gas phase organic chemicals, which have changes in vapor pressure as a function of different oxidation processes indoors, and then actually can partition back with lower vapor pressure into the particle phase, which you see illustrated a bit. Oops, now we are going very fast. Can you go back already? I'm talking fast, but not that fast. Okay, what's also for indoor, for PM still missing is also outdoor secondary PM formation, and also to consider radon consistently. The second scoping document here would be looking at the radiation impact. Starting point is we have methods available, starting with Rolf Frischknecht's method in 2001, but also 2 others we have seen now have emerged. One is directly building on use tox, by the way. reviews are available to see the state of the art and what is still missing, different mechanisms that need to be harmonized. And the work to be done is really identify a suitable method that we can actually integrate in our LCA method here, adapt for damage modeling, everything, look on the one hand on ionizing impacts, but on the other hand on non-ionizing radiation, including optical, radio frequency, electromagnetic, and other non-radiative impacts. Next slide, please. And I think that's the last one. Perhaps. Perfect. Yeah, the overarching impacts that we also work in the task force are, finding the DALI metric as a suitable damage metric, important, and investigate how can that be best aligned across the different contributing impact categories, addressing impacts versus benefits. For example, for nutrition, we have also health benefits. So here's we have to see what part goes into the characterization versus what part should be considered as part of the functional unit, for example. Then minimizing overlaps across categories within the human health impact, within human health area of protection, for example, overlap, climate change, air pollution, noise, and others. And then, of course, also cross-cutting with other areas of protection, minimizing overlaps, where we have, for example, water use that contributes to human health, but also to ecosystem impact. I think that's pretty much it, Olivier.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll take, if there are questions. I see that Manish demands.
Yeah, I can answer. I see that question. This is Tom. Yeah. So including background radiation, it's a good question.
Background concentration, sorry.
Background concentrations,
yes.
But that I'm guessing that refers to radiation as opposed to others. So a main focus of what we're doing is to look at natural occurring radioactive materials, which in a sense is background. But we're particularly interested in, for example, indoor radon, which is associated with naturally occurring radium, and the enhancement or mitigation of potential exposures indoors from that. But we're also in the category of what's called NORM, naturally occurring radioactive materials. There are industrial operations, mining, and others that enhance exposures to naturally occurring materials. And I think that's more important than just a study of the variation of natural background concentrations. For example, drilling muds from oil drilling and petroleum recovery actually have higher levels that are brought up and spread out. Gypsum mining, other operations of that type enhance exposures to natural materials that tend to be more isolated, and then we disperse them about the environment. There's another question about viruses. I don't know if we want to go into whether we should look at
there is a question. How about virus? How to consider, for example, the coronavirus?
Well, we would need to see what are the man-made effects or activities that would lead to the release of a virus, right? That we could consider perhaps. A virus as such, of course, is not really part of the game here. I mean, on the other side, our models partly can already be adapted to this situation with a lockdown, but this is parameterization. I don't think that viruses, particularly unless we have the sources for that, can be considered for now. I don't know.
Yeah, I think, well, somebody's making a comment about building standards, but I would say the one thing with regard to viruses, as you say, we can't look at virus emission, but virus dispersion, which is enhanced by transportation systems, industrial production, and other human activities. So there might be some opportunity for looking at dispersion impacts.
But yes, for indoor environments, of course, we are also coming with recommendations for different building parameterizations, where we look at recirculation of air mechanically or manually ventilated room settings. I mean, that is how we can consider the different standards partly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think also perhaps bacteria, if you like. There are several LCA where bacterial risk for humans might be considered. I mean, and virus could be also part of that. In the sense, I mean, if you have a drinking water problem or thing like that, or with the food, I mean, you have trade-off between use of pesticide and then some occurrence of bacterial infection. So that's something we haven't discussed. That's I mean, that could be interesting to put that side, I think, in that sense. We have a question on worker exposure.
Well, the one on building standards. So the extent to which we consider PM and radon levels. Well, we do look at building, probably not so much building standards, but opportunities for mitigation is certainly part of this.
And perhaps
then the worker question. Yeah.
Just on the building standard, I mean, we're not always informing standards, but I think many methods are based on the same data as those who are based on standard, if you like.
Right. And then the other question before they get away, they're going so fast, but we do consider communities near, so not only workers who are exposed directly, but we do consider nearby communities in the sense that we have an urban model that is associated with intense concentrations of industrial activity. Kind of running through these quickly, sorry.
I think Saranella from JSC and also Yolanda here, they're posing two related and important questions. How far, and Olivier, perhaps you can answer that more generally. How far we do want to arrive at mature and robust methods rather than too much exploratory and too much, let's say, inclusive methods.
Yeah. And that's the role exactly of the scoping phase. This is to say, okay, are some of these methods sufficiently, some of this area which are not framed presently sufficiently important with a good chance to arrive to mature that we take it, or we park it and we will take it in, I mean, a method is not fixed forever. I mean, it needs to be renewed every 3 years or something like that. So we note it, we park it, and let it. And that's the goal that at September we decide early, yes, we go for that additional category, or no, we don't. I mean, noise would be an example where we have not really decided that we'll go for it because we don't necessarily have the data for that, but there are some methods available for transportation. Should we go for it or not? That will be the decision in August based on the recommendation of the subtasks.
So there's a question about air pollution impacts, diabetes, dementia, this is from Yolanda. Diabetes, dementia, stroke. Actually, it's already incorporated in some of the work we've done. We do all-cause mortality and are actually moving towards all-cause morbidity in terms of determining the disability-adjusted life years for particulate matter. And I think that's something we want to explore expanding in the next phase of this, particularly for outdoor, but also extending to indoor sources of air pollution, particularly PM.
Okay.
A question about China.
Peter, perhaps last answer. And
yeah, I mean, we're in the end, we try to really look to cover all causes, so to really work towards all-cause mortality, but we are starting, of course, from what is covered in the global burden of disease. And here we have stroke included, diabetes not included, for example, for PM-related as a risk factor. And whatever we cover, we have 5 main diseases for PM, let's say including stroke, lung cancer, COPD, for example, and that together is called actually all-cause mortality. So if there's some upcoming evidence that can be included in these global burden of disease databases, we will consider them, of course. Otherwise, we rely on what is out there.
And then the last question about China, we actually have, for PM, we had pretty fairly good data on exposure response and intake fraction for China. I mean, the point is that the situation in China is very important, particularly with regard to air pollution. I guess that's the implication of the question. So, yep. So we did include sub-regions, actually China and sub-regions of China in our earlier methods.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll move to the next task force, but we will have still question in the end to come back here. And we will see if we have time for the nutrition. That's also can be also based on the global burden of disease, just to answer that one. Ecosystem Quality Task Force, Francesca and Rosalie, you're on.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Olivier. So you can move to the next slide. Rosalie and Franz Zellman and Francesca Vernes were chairing this task force.
So Francesca is professor at NTNU in Norway, Trondheim, and sorry, Peter is at DTU, Technical University, Denmark. Go ahead.
And Rosalie is in Nijmegen.
Yep.
So yeah, you can move to the next one.
Sorry. Yes, here we are.
Yeah, so we're also starting, you know, from what has been recommended in the first two Pelton reports. So there have been recommendations on an endpoint level already for land use eutrophication, acidification, and then ecotoxicity. I mean, there's on the midpoint level, there's also climate change related impacts, but not on an endpoint level. So that's basically the starting point where we are. So if we go to the next slide, Olivier, then we have basically three subtasks that we have discussed so far in the working group. And the first one is the harmonization of the recommended categories. And that means that basically we need to check if those four impact categories that I mentioned before are really compatible with each other. For example, in terms of, is it always the same endpoint? What is the endpoint metric? They have all used potentially distributed fraction of species. One question there, for example, is what is this potentially distributed fraction of species actually referring to? Is it local losses, global losses, regional losses, whatever? We're also going to look at, you know, what is the spatial configuration, for example? What is the level of complexity that we have for these different impact categories? For example, land use, quite detailed with ecoregion specific impacts. Climate change at the moment, not regionalized, for example, or ecotoxicity, also not as, you know, spatially refined. Also taxonomic coverage, if we think about ecosystem qualities, of course, is important. There have been different taxonomic groups being covered in these different impact categories. We need to see and discuss if this is a problem. How can we make this compatible? Also, of course, you know, how do we in the end, and should we maybe aggregate an elephant and a whale? So, I mean, you know, you have different types of ecosystems as well, not just different taxonomic groups. So how to aggregate them, for example, if we should or not. So these are all you know, different questions, and I'm sure there's many more that we will come upon that we have to really thoroughly look at what is there right now, and we'll look at these through the RISE case study, which has been used, and then identify what is the remaining work done in these impact categories that we have to make them compatible. Then we can go to the next slide. The next, or the second subtask is basically adding new categories. So there we are at the moment collecting ideas and sort of candidate categories for additions. So what is clear, we want to have everything on an endpoint level. So everything which is just on a midpoint level is not sort of suitable here. So we think for ecosystem quality, we would definitely want to work on climate change on an endpoint level, water use impact on endpoint level, and then marine plastic impacts, for example, as well. And if you press once more, Olivier, there's, well, you know, if there are ideas for additions, other categories that people think that we should take into account. Yeah, so bearing in mind, of course, that we really need to have methods that are sort of being able to fit into the framework and also the, you know, the metrics, etc. that we have. So it needs to become compatible. Just as one example, this is work from the Marilka working group, which is the working group on marine impacts, and their work is directly going into also the ecosystem quality task force here for the marine plastics impact. And at the moment, this working group is working on a framework that you see here, basically for different you know, pathways and examples how marine litter can actually impact, well, ecosystem quality, but also potentially other areas of protection. Only for the ecosystem quality, of course, only the ones which are ending up with ecosystem quality would potentially be relevant. So this is just an example of what we would like to have for all the categories that we are covering. And if you go to the next one, Olivier. Yeah, so the third task sort of a little bit is like, you know, let's call it endpoint indicators. We maybe need a better name there as well. So, I mean, for the moment, we have said like we will stick to the potential distributed fraction of species as an indicator for it, because it is just also a pragmatic choice in the end. There's all the other methods that have been recommended so far have used it. We are discussing if there should be additional metrics, functional diversity as one, which we have started to discuss in the second phase of it, but still so far there is no operational method out there for that, but it's still a discussion. We're also discussing here vulnerability issues, and I can just already say that we are discussing, we will need a new name for that one. I mean, it's confusing people what we mean there. I mean, basically it's trying to scale local losses to global losses, etc. So vulnerability is definitely not the correct name there, but this is something that we need to consider as well. And then, as I already said as well, how do we harmonize, for example, across different ecosystems, aquatic, terrestrial, marine ecosystems, etc. Yes, so I think that's so far where we are. We have also quite a lot of members already, which are quite active. We have just really started like 2 months ago with scoping and discussing, but it's going very well, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so we have a question like in new category, why not include freshwater plastic impact too? From Sylvie.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. Right now, Marilka is working on the marine part of it, so on really, you know, the effects and the fate, etc., in the marine system. So, I mean, again, if there are people who are working on, you know, also the freshwater plastic impact, and we are able to see that we can arrive at something which is really operational in 2 years, then of course we can do that. I mean, we just also need to see, of course, how many people do we have, what's their expertise, how much time do they have, what can we actually do. But if there are people working on this that would you know, want to chip in with contributing to this work, then for sure we can discuss that.
Thank you. Other question? On the ecosystem, or comments, or
So either everything was very unclear or very clear. Difficult to
or
say
very
which
clear.
is yours.
So to everybody, I mean, the chat is also nice there. There were some comments, and some of them was answered directly on the chat. If you have ideas in the coming week or something like that, you're most welcome to
Yes.
to give us inputs, and that we can move ahead with that. Okay, so let's then in that case move to the next group and task force, which is natural resources and ecosystem services. It's chaired by Tim Grant from Australia and Masaru Motoshita from Japan. And I think, Tim, you are the one speaking here, but
yes, thanks, Olivier.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Yes, so as Olivier has mentioned, I'm co-chairing with Masaharu. And so if we go to the first slide. So we're covering in this area, one back, one slide backwards, please.
Sorry.
The other
Oops.
way. So we're covering natural resources. Yeah, one more past here. Sorry, there's probably a delay, so I'm probably asking for it, and then I don't see it.
So you want what? The LCA framework?
Yep, that one. Yep, the LCA framework.
Sorry about that.
So we're working within the area of natural resources, biotic, abiotic, and generally the area of ecosystem services. There is, if if we look at the pathways, we already have some established indicators, but the area is generally, particularly the biotic resources and ecosystem services part, is relatively new to LCA, so our development task is a little different to that of the other task forces in terms of the maturity of the area. If we just go to the next slide, please, Olivier.
Yep.
In the first, actually in the second phase of the of this project, there was work done on mineral resources, which came up with a range of different methods that were targeted to different types of questions. And we also looked at land use effects on soil quality and came up with two methods there, a soil organic carbon method and a erosion method. So they're pre-existing, although I think both of them had some caveats over the applicability and the need to look out for further developments. So the focus, if we go one more slide forward, the focus, currently we have started our work. We have 35 people express interest. We're getting a good majority of them already on our meetings. So there's a really great amount of interest and a lot of experts. We kicked off on the 21st of April with an overview of the project, a bit of a discussion around the aims of the task force and starting to prepare, outline what the work plan is over the next 3 years, 2.5 years. And then 2 nights ago, for me it was night, we had our first meetings of 2 subgroups, one on resources or mineral resources and the other one on ecosystem services. And so our urgent task really is to work on the potential endpoints, areas of protection, and outline some of the relevant impact pathways for for this area. Next slide, please. So the work plan is we are at the moment looking to identify what the safeguard subjects are related to natural resources and ecosystem services, identify the relevant impact pathways, work towards what metrics can represent these safeguard subjects, look at how we can measure the damage and the applicability of and gaps in the existing methods that relate to natural resources and ecosystem services. And then we'll go into the applicability assessment of the available models, look at gaps and opportunities, and that gets us to a draft here by the end of this year. And then we go into the work program, which you've seen is to actually go into a development phase. So we just go to the next slide, please. So some of the points that have come up in the early parts of this work, one key issue is whether the term ecosystem services, which has appeared across the impact pathway at different times in different places, whether it is in itself represents a good definition of an area of protection, or whether it more represents a group of impact activities. We recognise that ecosystem services, in providing services to human beings, they also provide benefits to the ecosystem. They can also provide benefits to human health. And so there are going to be some interactions between the development of the ecosystem service pathways and the other areas of protection. We also, one of the strong themes in the ecosystem services literature really links through to the cultural endpoints, which were in little red dashed lines. So it may be that we actually try and do some development in that area. And we're not sure where the different ecosystem service categorization that exists, how it relates to maybe midpoints and endpoints. So one of the challenges and one of the strengths and difficulties in this project will be there's already been a lot of work in the ecosystem services area, not with an LCA focus, but it's not, there is actually already an existing way of thinking, a way of looking at the world, and we need to try and map that onto LCA and see how it fits in a life cycle impact assessment framework. Next slide, please. In the other points is the applicability of our ultimate, what the metric is. Can we find a common metric for resource functions as well as minerals, water, forests, and ecosystem services? Can we bring them through to a common endpoint? How we actually deal with the different timeframes that are involved between different resources and their ability to, for example, recover from damage, and the time frame that you actually assess them over. And then there's a little bit of discussion around stocks, flows, and funds for resources, and if we need to treat them differently, which resources fit in which framework for those, particularly within the mineral, fossil, water-related impacts. I think that is.
That's it. Yep. Thank you very much, Tim. A question from the audience on the natural resources side and ecosystem services.
I see our land management practices within scope. They're already land management practices are definitely in scope for soil quality impacts within the soil organic carbon metric that we already have and the erosion metric. Both of them include rudimentary effects sensitivity to different land management practices. It's not great, not well developed, but it does exist in terms of tillage and levels of inputs, and some basic things like that are already in there. So it's certainly in scope to the extent that which we can find methods that take it into account.
Other question?
Is there any plan to improve the current recommendation on soil quality at the midpoint? I think our focus will be on how we get to a common endpoint and what that common endpoint might look like, and then working back from there to the midpoints that lead to that. If that leads to an evolution of the recommendation of the midpoint, then whether the SOC fits that or not, or needs some sort of modification, that is not out of scope. But we would obviously need a very strong reason to go against that.
Other question?
Consensus on biodiversity measurements. That really I will leave probably to the ecosystem quality thing, but we do, obviously biodiversity will be, we had a lot of discussion around biodiversity impacts in relation to ecosystem services. I don't know whether we'll have how much that will, how we really need to coordinate our work with the the natural biodiversity related activities. Is there something planned on mineral resource assessment loss? There's certainly discussion within the mineral resource issue, and maybe Masahiro, if you wanted to, but in around different approaches to the dispersion of minerals versus merely their extraction from the ground, and at what point you measure damage to that resource. I think the thinking there will be looking for a common framework that works across different resource categories. And so if dispersion is more sensible as a common goal, common for the different things, and that may be, it's certainly within the discussion. I assume that was what that question meant, Michael.
Any other question?
There's a question on functional diversity as an endpoint. So I'll maybe leave that if Francesca, did you want to, and how this was?
Yeah, I mean, that with the functional diversity, I mean, that we have not finally, you know, I don't think we have any conclusion or anything about that. So, I mean, I think that remains a discussion point, and certainly we will need to see if and how there's, you know, that there's certainly no overlaps with ecosystem services, etc. And there was another question about like consensus on biodiversity measurements. I'm not sure what you mean with measurements, but at least when it comes to biodiversity, just the metrics, I mean, the current pragmatic consensus is that we will stick to PDF, and then, as I said, we'll continue to investigate options or possibilities of functional diversity.
There is a question on how can the resource indicator be developed to support circular economy. I think looking at the different ways in which we measure depletion, and the idea maybe of the occupation of a resource and then it's either dissipation or return could be really a way that would align the metric to measuring circular economy. So it's certainly in the ideas area. And soil quality can be developed to guide sustainability of precision agriculture. I think it's one of the first tasks that we're also undertaking is a review of, in the ecosystem services area, what we think is actually really important in terms of the things which are coming up as having a high impact on our quality of life, so within the ecosystem services area. And so, you know, rather than just measuring everything that we can measure, focus on things that really are having a significant impact. And so something like the evolution of precision agriculture, you know, would be one of those things that we would say, here's a technology that could, you know, revolutionize the level of environmental quality of agricultural areas. Then we would want to try and build metrics that support that.
Okay, thank you very much. We need to move to the last task force. So Alexis and Alessandra. Alexis Laurent is associate professor at Technical University Denmark. Alessandra Zamani is working in an institute in Italy. Go ahead, please.
Yes, well, hello everyone. Olivier, you're still passing the slide for me, right?
Yes, correct.
Good. Yes, so the cross-cutting issues, so it will be led by myself and by Alessandra Zamani from Eco Innovations. The cross-cutting issues, like the other task force, we're also building on what has been done in the volume 1 and volume 2 of the previous works. So the LCI midpoint damage framework that Olivier presented earlier. And also a number of aspects that have been addressed before, like specialization, the uncertainty management, and other issues that are not listed here for time constraints. So if we move on, Olivier, please. Yep. The other way, I think.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Right. So we have the four subtasks that we have so far planned for. The first one is normalisation, which will be led by myself and by Yi Yang. And then a weighting subtask by Marco Sinelli and Chris Koffler. And then we have the GLAM implementation and LCI connection issues, which would be co-chaired by Shun Yao and Roland Ischier. And then a fourth one on consistency issues across impact categories, damage categories, and I will come back to that later. So I'm going to walk you through each of them separately. If you could do one click, Olivier, or 2 clicks. I have some animations, unfortunately, for the slides.
Yep.
Right. So the last 2 points I wanted to make on this slide is that normalization weighting, also they are on separate subtask, we are going to ensure consistency across the two of them. And in fact, we're going to look also in consistency across characterization, normalization, weighting, so the 3 steps. So that's something that will be done as well. And the last point I wanted to make here is on the LCI connection issues. As you know, it's quite a major source of problems in LCA practice. And to really ensure that all the opinions, not yet, that all the opinions are reflected, we really try to capture all the key stakeholders. So the LCI database developers, all the major LCA software houses, and LCI method developers. So all around the same table to discuss that. So the normalization subtask, the main purpose, would be to guide the choice of normalization. So if it would be easier, I think, Olivier, if you just pass all the animations. The main objectives would be to, as I said, to really look into the dependencies between normalization, weighting, and aggregation of all indicators. And in fact, that objective would be the same for the weighting subtask. And then more concretely, the idea is to derive a set of normalization references that could be that could follow the LCIA, the GLAM LCIA methodology that would be recommended at the end. And one of the critical aspects we're going to look into is the characterization of the uncertainties. That's the objective number 3 you see here. So that's normalization in a nutshell for now. Next slide, if you please. Weighting subtask now. So on the same level, the objective would be to look into recommending weighting approaches and set of weighting factors that could be applied to the methodology at the end. So if I start with objective 2 here, would be to really look into different implications of weighting approaches on the aggregated results at midpoint and endpoint levels. So probably starting with a review of what exists already. And the same as normalization, also look into the viability uncertainty of the weighted impact results. So really looking into the uncertainty there, which is a major problem. And the outcome would be the weighting factors and hopefully probability distribution of those factors at the end. So the third subtask, LCI connection issues, and then the GLAM implementation. So the main objectives here would be, they are twofold. I mean, the first one is a continuation of what started in phase 2, which is to identify the sources of all the inconsistencies due to the connection between LCI and LCIA. So identifying gaps, like the nomenclature problems, the problem of equivalence between emission compartments, and so on. So trying to again identify those sources and try to find solutions to mitigate them, with, as I said before, having all the actors around the table. And the second objective is addressing the GLAM implementation. So it's really how to take those recommendations from objective 1 into practice on the GLAM LCI methodology. So to try to really bring consistency into the implementation of the methodology at the end. Yes, next slide, if you please.
Sorry, where am I?
So that's the last subtask. So it's on consistency issues across impact damage categories. It's kind of a loose title for now. So this subtask is a little bit special. The idea is really to facilitate the dialogue and the harmonization across the 3 previous task forces that have been introduced. So the human health, ecosystems quality, and resources and ecosystems services. And there the scoping will go very much along the scoping of those 3 task forces. So it will go over the summer. And some topics that are listed here, it's not exhaustive, but there are aspects like spatial differentiation, how to handle that across all the different damage categories or impact categories. The handling of the uncertainties as well. We'll try to aim for a quantification of uncertainties for all characterization factors, at least from a semi-quantitative point of view, if we cannot do a full quantitative perspective. Yes, I think that's it. Is that? Yeah, that was the last one. Yeah, it's about different modeling. So again, it's really to bring consistency in all those the three previous task forces.
Okay,
so,
thank you very much. So we have question perhaps on the waiting. If we go in the chat.
Are the issues on waiting too?
Yeah, it came from me. Perhaps I can ask you directly.
Yes,
Sorry.
go ahead.
Hi, Alexi. It's Hannah from Austria. I was wondering if you expect that in the end you have as an outcome one set of weighting scores fitting all, because I think that would be utopic, or would we more end up with a recommendation or a guidance on how to define the correct method to define weighting sets for each way of implementation then in the end?
Yeah, so that's an open question still. I think it will depend very much on what exists and also how we, if we manage to find consensus around one set of weighting factors. I mean, and otherwise, I mean, one way could be to have a guidance with around one set of factors and then recommend the sensitivity with different approaches, which yeah, again, I don't want to say too much. I think it will be part of the work to identify those options.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Before we ask another question, we have a small. I'll come back to the question, Alexi. We have a small poll to do about the name of the method. So I will just launch it via a poll as you're listening to the next answers. There are just 3 questions. Takes a few minutes. We have 2 names so far, which is GLAM for Global Life Cycle Impact Assessment Method. The second name was UNILCA for United Nations Impact Assessment Method for LCA, which has a bit the LCA in it. But I mean, so and we ask you just to tell your advice. And do you have any other suggestion? So I just launched the polling and we continue the discussion. Go ahead, Alexi. Or
yeah, okay. I need to. Sorry, I was listening to you. In fact, so Hannah, I think I answered your questions, right? The carrying capacities of ecosystems. So I guess that also relates to the planetary boundaries. I think as part of the normalization and perhaps also the weighting. I mean, the idea here is to really have a broad coverage of all the different opinions and perspectives on how to do normalization and weighting before we can review and identify recommended approaches. And in that perspective, in that setting, it would make sense to include the recommendations or some recommendations to have normalization references or weighting factors based on carrying capacities or the planetary boundaries. So, and that would be part of the review. Then whether or not they would be retained at later stage, that still remains to be.
okay. Other question or comment? We've got half of the vote in. That's interesting.
So there's one question from Manuela here. Did you manage to reach out to social scientists and involve them in a weighting subgroup? That's indeed a relevant question. I would say no, but I don't know everyone within the subtask yet. And I could mention also that all the subtasks are still under construction, so to speak. But if you have recommendations, I think you're welcome to send names manually.
Yeah, I probably send you 1 or 2 names. I think it's dangerous having only engineers
I agree. Yeah.
suggesting value choices.
Sure. Yeah. No, it really makes sense. Yeah.
Makes perfect sense. Just Manuele, I think in the whole endeavor, the question is, when do we involve the specialist of a domain? And our experience is to frame the things. It's sometimes hard. I mean, we can start framing, doing our homework, And once we arrive with a good question, then we do a workshop where we invite outside people from LCA and get their input in an efficient way. I think that has been often the good way to go. Okay, go ahead, Alexi.
Yeah, so there was one very quick question on the involvement of the GLAD, I mean the link to the GLAD project, and I confirm there is a link. We have several people involved in this subtask, including the chairs, then also part of the GLAD project, some of the chairs. So yes, and then there's, will the weighting factors change with time? For different years, the priorities are different. That will have to be considered as part of the weighting subtask. So I took note of it to carry that to the chairs. And then there's one question from Lorenzo Benini on cross-cutting. I need to read it, sorry. So yeah, so the question is, as I understand, it's about uncertainties along the LCIA modeling, especially the mid to endpoint modeling. And yes, and as I say, I mean, this is a generic topic that will be addressed as part of the last. I expect it will be addressed as part of the last subtask in the task force. So the one on consistency issues. This is really where we try to bring all the topics that are really cross-cutting. Yeah, over all the damage categories. And as far as I know, by the way, I think you're also a member of that subtask. I think that's it.
Okay.
So far.
If anybody needs to vote, I leave you another 20 seconds. Otherwise, we can look at the polling results. So, I mean, thank you very much for joining these efforts. And if you are interested, it's still possible to join the task forces. And there are two status, if you like, in the task forces. There is one which is a member task, and that implies that you commit for each task force you join at least 8 days equivalent during the year of work. And if you want just to be kept informed, you could also indicate, yes, I'm interested to be sort of agenda member in these task forces. Alexi, you had another question?
Well, no, there's someone who had a question on the timeline that was actually on the last slide, but we went too quickly on that. But the time slide is following the same as the other task forces. So we'll start the work this spring, summer, and then until the spring, summer 2022.
Okay, so I will end the polling in 5 seconds, and we'll look at it together shortly. Just for, it's the first time I do a polling with 122 participants, so it's fun. Okay, and I will share results. Okay. So GLAM, you say you have 50, well, half of people think it's appropriate and nice, a quarter very appropriate and nice, and a quarter rather not. Here we have more on the neutral, not very catchy side, and 47 of you think that GLAM is good, we don't need it. We have 2 who have a good idea, so send it now by email. We'll think about it and email it. We are open if you have really a good idea, why not to go to it. Okay, I'll Johannes, do you have a last word to finish with, or?
No, I think, I mean, I was I was quite engaged with following the presentations and the chat. I think it was a really engaging discussion, and I thank everybody for your participation. I also had, I mean, just wanted to mention that there was kind of a parallel discussion at some point with that initial question on the impacts of the life cycle initiative, as this was initially planned as a face-to-face meeting. As I mentioned, I mean, a lot of what we do, if not most of what we do, is actually in virtual meetings, and that allows the participation of many. I think actually, if this stakeholder consultation had taken place in Dublin, we would have had less participation, quite
20,
likely.
I mean, 30 people who were not involved.
We had 30 registered. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, that was the size, right? But so certainly, I think that's an area where we see, particularly in these processes, most of the work is done, as Olivier was saying, it's done online. It's done through the year, and I think actually this is also a key strength of the Life Cycle Initiative in bringing the community together for these important processes of building consensus and advancing, progressing in methods very clearly without stopping the methodological development, which will continue to happen in many of your institutions. But at some point as well, it's good that practitioners all over the world have something to refer to, and they say, this is the method that is being recommended. We can use that. So other than that, I mean, just thanking you all again for the active participation through the afternoon or evening or night or morning, and we look forward to continue the interaction with you in the coming months and years. And if the question was about the last word about the name, no, definitely I don't have that last word. But I think it was a very very interesting to see the results of the poll.
Yeah. What is interesting is when you ask, if you would ask the question, you would have 3 or 4 vocal people saying it. That's interesting that we can give word to everybody. I mean, so some of these technology are interesting. And in terms of reducing impact, we've never done a meeting with 300 people with so little impact in that case.
Absolutely.
Okay, we are recording it. It goes on the cloud, but no, it goes on my computer so far, not even the cloud. Okay, thank you so much to everybody. Thanks for the energy. It's exciting. I say after 30 years of effort for me there, to see that we are arriving to recommendation which could be useful worldwide within Life Cycle Initiative is really exciting. I hope we can canalize the efforts so that we arrive to something useful and productive for the world. We are here to serve our world. So let's go. Let's serve. Bye, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.